Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me. Make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share it with your family and friends because I have a great guest coming on. I have Dinesh D'Souza, got a brand new film that's dropping, The Dragon's Prophecy. It's going to be in select theaters on October 6th and 8th. You could visit the website, thedragonsprophecyfilm.com. I'll have links up at the PAS report. Dinesh, always a pleasure to have you back on. How are you today?
Hey, I've been doing great. What a time we live in. Just got back a couple of days ago from Charlie Kirk's funeral. And of course, we're walking into this huge debate about Israel and Hamas. And there's a need, I think, to address this issue, particularly on the right, because we're kind of accustomed to critiques from the left. Israel is a colonizing power, genocide, we've heard all that. But now you have, particularly coming from a lot of young people, these concerns that sort of the U.S. is owned by Israel, and maybe it was even the Mossad behind shooting Charlie Kirk. And, as Tucker said to Ted Cruz, he's like, how do you know the Jews of today are the descendants of the ancient Israelites from the Bible? So all of this stuff, all the underlying issues are tackled in this film, and yet the film applies a kind of enlarged or biblical point of view in interpreting current events.
Well, I think you touch on something that's really important, and we'll hit on all that. When you look at the right, a lot of times we live in our echo chambers, and people don't like to criticize people within their own little political factions. But there is something happening. I mean, we are seeing anti-Semitism grow among the right, this conspiracy theorist logic that Charlie Kirk was offered $150 million to keep his mouth shut and change opinions on Israel. What's going on the right that's allowing this to fester?
Part of it, I think, is the decline of trust in institutions. And so conspiracy theories of the past have been proven true. Like, is it really true that the government is actively censoring us? Actually, it is true. Is it really true that they made up the whole Russia hoax as a way of framing Trump? Yes, it is true. So people have become very skeptical of sort of received points of view. And the other thing is that I think for a lot of young people, the ultimate kind of political incorrectness is to indulge in a kind of rebellious, Israel is behind everything, the Jews are behind everything, not just in Israel, but also domestically. They run Hollywood, they run the businesses, they run the digital platforms. And I think that it may be that in the past, sometimes the charge of anti-Semitism was used too widely and too broadly. And so I'm very careful in this film to think hard about what that actually means. And I'll tell you what I think it does mean. It means if you apply a standard to the whole world, but then when it comes to Israel, your standard suddenly disappears or changes, or you raise the moral bar, then your motives are rightly suspect, right? So if you say, for example, hey, America was attacked at Pearl Harbor, and even though the number of civilian casualties was pretty minimal, the United States was absolutely right to go to war with Japan and to strike back. And whether or not you agree with the atomic bombs, even if the bombs weren't dropped, the U.S. was getting ready for a massive land invasion of Japan that would produce untold casualties. And yet if you think that's okay, that's just, they started it, we have to finish it, then you have to ask why when it comes to Israel, suddenly you have a different moral calculus. Suddenly you go, well, the Hamas only killed 1,047 people on October 7th, so Israel needs to stop because it has exceeded that number in Gaza. There is a huge chasm of difference between what Israel is doing and what Hamas is doing. And the film examines these political dimensions, but it then surprises you by putting all of this in just a much larger, not just an historic, I would say even a biblical framework.
And I want to ask you about that because I find it fascinating. First of all, if Israel was really that powerful, I don't think you'd be hearing the criticism that we do from other nation states that are now saying that they're going to recognize a Palestinian statehood and whatnot. But I want to know what compelled you to do the Dragon's Prophecy. When you look at the way you do films, it's always brilliant. And everyone, you need to check out Dinesh's work because he really puts on a fascinating story. And at the same time, he's able to bring in the theoretical concepts and match it up with the historical facts. So, what brought you to this? And how do you separate the theoretical from the historical in an easy way for the audience to digest?
The film kind of came together in three parts. So in the beginning, in December of 22, my wife and I went to Israel for the first time, and we were exposed to biblical archaeology. Now, there are many figures in the Bible that until about 40 years ago were only in the Bible, meaning there was no outside historical or archaeological confirmation of them. And so it was very easy for people to say, well, these people are made up. There was no person called Pontius Pilate. There was no person called Isaiah or Jeremiah or even King David. The Bible was written hundreds of years later. This stuff was kind of made up to fit a narrative. So all of this was widely said in the 19th century through the 20th century by a lot of skeptics, the so-called biblical higher criticism. And then suddenly, starting really about the middle of the 20th century, we began to see stones and inscriptions and seals come out of the ground, and suddenly you realized that no, here's an inscription. Pontius Pilate was the Roman prefect in the northern part of Israel. He's a real person. Isaiah was a real person, Jeremiah, even minor figures who are barely mentioned in the Bible. Suddenly their name turns up on a seal, and you realize, no, this Bible could not have been written hundreds of years later. Nobody would have known that this guy was the royal steward to King Hosea in like the 7th century BC. So anyway, I was blown away by all this stuff, and I'm like, I don't understand why this isn't shouted from the rooftops of every synagogue and every church. Then October 7th comes along several months later, and I'm like, this is really, to me, seems like it's a really big event. It has a larger significance, and in a way it ties into biblical archaeology because the underlying question is, whose land is it? It got me thinking really about, like, how do you get title deeds to a piece of land? Why did the Indians have a right to hold India, right? What about America? The Native Americans were here first, but the white man sort of took it by conquest. So what gives you the right to put a fence around a piece of property and go, this is mine in perpetuity? And then along comes a guy named Jonathan Cahn with this book called The Dragon's Prophecy, the title of our film. And he makes a very startling point I'd never thought about. He goes, listen, the battle between Israel and Hamas is almost like a blow-by-blow recreation of ancient battles depicted in the Bible, in the Old Testament, between the Israelites and like their ancient enemies, people like the Amalekites or the Moabites, or most importantly, the Philistines. And by the way, the Philistines lived in an area that the Bible calls, you guessed it, Gaza. It's the same place. And when Samson, for example, the biblical hero, he kind of represents Israel, he's captured by the Philistines. What do? They blind him, just like Israel was blinded on October 7th. They drag him where? To Gaza. And then it says in the Bible, the people of Gaza demanded, strip him and bring him out so we can be entertained by him. And there are so many scenes on October 7th and October 8th of captives from Israel being stripped and dragged out into public in Gaza, where people are cheering and laughing, Allahu Akbar. So all of this is not just said in the movie, it's shown. And none of this is really part of our debate now. So it's a very fresh way of thinking and looking at all this. You begin to realize October 7th wasn't just an epical event. It was, in some ways, a biblical event.
Certainly could be. And what do you say to those that try to dismiss the biblical prophecy as a metaphor rather than actual prediction?
Well, first of all, I don't try to convince people to accept the legitimacy of Israel solely because, quote, like God gave the land to Abraham. I do think that that is itself interesting because there's a sort of a theological debate around it. Tucker Carlson raised this issue when he says to Ted Cruz, hey, gee, how do you know that the Jews of today are the true descendants of the ancient Israelites? So I can go into that. But I would put it, Nick, in a very simple way. There are three ways I think that you get land. if you look at the history of the world. Don't just apply it to Israel. Number one, you get it because you were there first. You are the original inhabitants. Like the Indians were the original inhabitants of India. That's how they got India. That's why they're keeping it. The second way is you get it by some sort of negotiation. There's some sort of a treaty. The lines are drawn. And the third is by conquest. So if you look at America, the United States of America, we know the Native Americans were here first. So if you look at the first box, which is original inhabitancy, that's check on their side. But on the other hand, they were conquering each other, one tribe taking land from the other, and the white man comes along, takes it from them. So conquest goes to the white man. So arguably it's divided. But with Israel, notice that Israel checks every single box. Who was there first? The Jews. Second, who got the land by negotiation and, in fact, by assignment by the United Nations after World War II? The Jews. Who has held the land through multiple wars, 1948, 1967, 1973? The Jews. So whichever title deed you look for, whichever box of legitimacy, Israel qualifies. In a way, you could say the Jews have a stronger right to that land than, let's say, we do to the United States of America, for the reason I just gave.
And I think that's important when we talk about the United States. We're going to take a quick commercial break, so everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Are you ready to move easily and independently without pain and stiffness holding you back? Do you want to look in the mirror and see a hydrated glow instead of more fine lines and wrinkles? Well, discover Native Path Collagen, made with only type 1 and 3 collagen fibers. These are the two most important types that make up 90% of the collagen found in your cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, and gut. They provide maximum benefits, and Native Path Collagen is a single ingredient formula with no fillers, additives, or artificial sweeteners. Plus, it's third-party tested for heavy metals, ensuring purity and safety. Completely flavorless, Native Path Collagen can be added to anything: coffee, smoothies, oatmeal, you name it. It doesn't clump, it absorbs fast thanks to its peptide formula. And the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals at a fraction of the price of other brands. With over 4 million jars sold, 1 million happy customers, 8,000 5-star reviews, and a 365-day no-risk guarantee, Native Path is a brand you could trust. They offer an 800 number for any questions you may have, and then you'll speak to a real person who's there to help. Visit getnativepath.com/PAS and start your transformation today. That's getnativepath.com/PAS. Welcome back to the PAS Report Podcast. I'm talking to Dinesh D'Souza, The Dragon's Prophecy, new film coming out. It's going to be in theaters October 6th and 8th, and you can visit thedragonsprophecies.com. Check it out. Now, Dinesh, how do you tie in America and our destiny into what's happening over there? Because I think that's really important for the audience to understand.
Yes. Israel is in some ways a unique country in that it is the convergence of three of the world's great religions, right? Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So on the site that is now called the Temple Mount, Solomon built his original temple. And that contained the Ark of the Covenant. It's the holiest site in Judaism. Later, the temple came down. It was destroyed by the Babylonians, and Herod, King Herod, the infamous King Herod of the Bible, rebuilt that temple. That's called the Second Temple. Jesus actually was in that temple. When his parents lost him at the age of 12, they looked around. Where was he? He was in the temple, that temple, Herod's temple. And then later, of course, Jesus was tried in Jerusalem. Now, the Muslims come along in the 7th century in the Umayyad dynasty. They conquer that region. They know the significance of Jerusalem. In fact, Muhammad himself knew the significance of Jerusalem. The Muslims in the beginning did not pray facing Mecca. They prayed facing Jerusalem. They were very eager to conquer Jerusalem, and when they conquered it, they essentially did what colonialists do. They put a victory arch. They built right on top of the old temple site, and they put a Dome of the Rock, and they put a mosque that is called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So on this exact same piece of land, you have the holiest site of Judaism, you have the holiest site of Christianity, and you have one of the holiest sites of Islam. So it's very interesting because what the Bible predicts is that in some way, the last age, the fate of man is tied in with that place. And I think it's one of the reasons, by the way, that the conflict over there has just seemed insoluble. I mean, I came to this country in 1978. There was the Carter peace plan, the Reagan peace plan, the Clinton peace plan. Now, because Trump wants it to Gaza to be the Riviera. But it's, other conflicts around the world melt away. Northern Ireland, India, Pakistan heats up, cools down. But this place is like always raw. And the Bible actually says it's going to be that way. It's not going to be permanently solved. You can make things better, but you're not going to resolve the underlying issue, because the underlying issue is connected with a unfolding sequence of events that is described and even predicted in the Bible.
It really is amazing. And you said something earlier about the archaeological discoveries that are actually showing that elements within the Bible were real. They weren't fiction. They weren't made up by people. I mean, I've been reading news stories. I get alerts over the last several months. The amount of alerts I got where archaeologists uncovered something that validates something that's in the Bible. So can you explain to the audience how that fits into the film?
It fits into the film because Jonathan Cahn gives this kind of brilliant biblical analysis or framework. But his audience is primarily believing Christians. But on the other hand, I have an audience that's secular. There are people who are going to say, well, yeah, Dinesh, but how do I know that these biblical events are real? How do I know that the people and the things that are described in the Bible took place? And so there's a kind of taste of biblical archaeology in this film. It's not treated systematically, but I'll give a small example that I think you'll find very fascinating. So in the book of Jeremiah lives about the 6th or 7th century BC. There's a king named Zedekiah, and Jeremiah is predicting, hey, to the king, you better straighten up, because otherwise some people from the north are going to invade, and they're going to conquer this place, and you're going to be finished, and you're going to come to grief. And the king doesn't really believe it, but he's kind of worried about it. So he pulls in two of his minor court officials. One is a guy named Yehukal, son of Shelemiah, and the other guy is Gedaliah, son of Pashur. Obscure guys, barely mentioned in the Bible. Basically, the king goes, check on Jeremiah, make sure he's not causing me too much trouble, all right? And then the Bible story ends over there. Jeremiah's predictions later come true. But here's the point. Fast forward 2,500 years. A bunch of people, a drain pipe is broken. They're digging in the area of the city of David in Jerusalem. And out of about 30 seals, clay seals found in the ground, one of them goes, Jehukal, son of Shelemiah, and the other one, Gedaliah, son of Pashur. Now, think of it. First of all, nobody writing the Bible 300 years later would even know who these guys are. This would be like 300 years from now trying to figure out, for example, some minor guy who served in the Trump administration in the FCC. And so when from the seal, you look at it and you're startled because you realize, first of all, that these guys were real. And if they were real, Zedekiah was real, Jeremiah was real. These are real events, and they're being astonishingly corroborated, almost as if some divine presence has realized, guess what? The world is becoming more secular. Everybody's now going with the language of reason and science. So guess what? I'm going to speak back to the world through the stones in the language, not of revealed doctrine, but in the language of archaeology and science itself. Very fascinating stuff.
It is. And you bring up a great point. When we look at the Western world, many in the West, particularly the United States, have been moving away from faith. And they have been, there's almost no sense of purpose, particularly amongst the youth. But something changed. And we are seeing that between the coronavirus, the current state of politics, and now even maybe with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, that there's a whole bunch of young people that are yearning to learn, that they're gravitating back to faith, maybe to find that sense of purpose. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we are going back in some ways to the beginning. And I don't just mean the beginning, the founding. I think we're going in some ways further back. Western civilization, you know this as well as anybody, is built on two pillars, Athens and Jerusalem. Now, Athens, which represents classical reason, does not really need a defense because it doesn't really have any critics. Socrates was philosophy, and Plato and Aristotle, and there was Greek theater, and there was the foundation of democracy. All right. But Jerusalem has always been controversial. Why? Because Jerusalem speaks in the language of revelation. And if you read the Bible, one of the striking things about it is it doesn't bother to defend itself. It doesn't bother to prove anything. It just goes, this is the way it is. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. right? And I'm thinking to myself, when I first read it, I remember just reading it as an adult, I'm like, who's speaking? God created the heavens and the earth. It doesn't say I created the heavens, so God isn't the speaker. There's some other speaker describing this, but who? No one else was there. So this kind of question, I think, is very appropriate to ask about the Bible. And yet, Jerusalem, if you remove Jerusalem, you are sort of knocking Western civilization over. It stands on both pillars. And that's why I think it's very important to interrogate and investigate Jerusalem no less than Athens. And the defense of the West requires a defense of both. So this film does that. It brings that kind of, people say often there's we have a political debate, and underneath it a moral debate, and underneath it a spiritual debate. But they stop there. They don't say who's fighting? What is this spiritual war? Who are the combatants? What are they fighting about, or what are they fighting over? And this film, using the example of Israel and using the example of October 7, shows what's at stake, who are the combatants. And as it turns out, the combatants is not Israel and Hamas. It's like God and the devil. So there's a struggle going on inside of every human heart between good and evil. And in some ways, the events of the world are a reflection of that. And all of this is brought out, I think, in the film in a very provocative way.
And that's a great point. And we go back to Socrates, where disorder in the soul leads to disorder within society. And I think that we could argue that there's plenty of disorder within the society, particularly in the Western world, because what I find amazing is how many people ultimately despise the place they come from. And what I mean by that is you have an entire generation that's been indoctrinated, not understanding how government works or the founding or Western civilization and the great Western thinkers that existed, but to say that Western culture is horrible, that Western culture is responsible for all the evils of the world. And we actively have people, Americans, or if you're in Europe and many of the European countries, that are undermining their own cultures, their own heritage. What do you make of it, particularly in places like the United Kingdom? I was watching a video earlier today where a lady says that UK is a Christian nation and she's being arrested for that.
I think the irony of it is that the rise of secularism, progressivism, leftism has, in fact, done a lot to erode and corrode and destroy the fabric of Western societies. So young people are raised in this somewhat chaotic, nihilistic, morally confused environment. They don't realize that this environment is not the way things used to be, and it's certainly not the way things ought to be. And what their teachers do is when you mention the indoctrination, what are they indoctrinated into? They're indoctrinated into believing that the very bad things that have produced their misery are actually good. And not only that, but the reason that they're miserable is because of the traditional values of their society, even though they have not experienced those traditional values. They have not been raised in those traditional values. In fact, those traditional values are what made the society strong and prosperous and whole in the first place. So there is a projection here, and the projection here is to blame what made the society in the first place for what has caused the society to degenerate now.
Another great point, and I want to pick that up after this quick break, so everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Are you ready to move easily and independently without pain and stiffness holding you back? Do you want to look in the mirror and see a hydrated glow instead of more fine lines and wrinkles? Well, discover Native Path Collagen, made with only type 1 and 3 collagen fibers. These are the two most important types that make up 90% of the collagen found in your cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, and gut. They provide maximum benefits. And Native Path Collagen is a single ingredient formula with no fillers, additives, or artificial sweeteners. Plus, it's third-party tested for heavy metals, ensuring purity and safety. Completely flavorless, Native Path Collagen can be added to anything: coffee, smoothies, oatmeal, you name it. It doesn't clump, it absorbs fast thanks to its peptide formula. And the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals at a fraction of the price of other brands. With over 4 million jars sold, 1 million happy customers, 8,000 5-star reviews, and a 365-day no-risk guarantee, Native Path is a brand you could trust. They offer an 800 number for any questions you may have, and then you'll speak to a real person who's there to help. Visit getnativepath.com/PAS and start your transformation today. That's getnativepath.com/PAS. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. I'm with Dinesh D'Souza. So, Dinesh, we're talking about, your film, The Dragon's Prophecy. Everyone needs to check it out. October 6th, 8th. It'll be in theaters. You can go to dragonsprophecyfilm.com. And I have to ask you, so critical thinking is lacking, obviously, in the United States, in the Western world. I think it's easy to explain if I just say queers for Palestine. I mean, I think that's the simplest way to show that people can't think critically anymore. When a society is unable to think critically, when a society doesn't appreciate their own customs, their own culture, is it like a Trojan horse that's entered the country? And can any country survive? Because go see his film. You'll see he gets you to think critically, and everyone needs to do that.
Well, I think one of the strangest alliances of our lifetime is the alliance between a kind of degenerate cultural left in this country and radical Islam. These two groups, right, could not be more incompatible. Certainly on the social front, on the moral front. In fact, each of them would exist extremely uncomfortably, to put it mildly, in the other side's world, right? So if you put radical Muslims, for example, into sort of the Moulin Rouge world of the left, they'd be like, what are we doing here?
Are you telling me that they don't want drag queen story hour?
Yeah, they don't want their kids getting pregnant out of wedlock. They don't want their son or daughter going trans. I mean, they'd be horrified by these ideas. They don't even like abortion. I mean, you're not going to see somebody like Ilhan Omar abort her own kid. Muslims just do not do that. On the other hand, similarly, you take the queers for Palestine and sort of stick them into Palestine, and they would start feeling uncomfortable right away because they'd be like, I'm in line for something. What am I in line for? Oh, you're in line to be beheaded. Oh, really? Why? That's because you're queer. I thought it was queers for Palestine. Well, it doesn't really matter because the first part of it kind of settles the issue for the radical Muslims, and that's that. So, but what you're saying is that the absence of critical thinking causes people on the left, young people particularly, to say, listen, we're just building a multi-racial coalition. We've kind of got the blacks over here. We got the gays over there. We got the trans people over here. We got the feminists over there, the abortion people. Let's just pull in the radical Muslims. They're just another identity group. And so they're going to fit really nicely inside of our rainbow tent. This is sort of the absence of critical thinking, I think it's fair to say.
It really is, and it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out in the end. I think that both sides, when you look at Marxists and when you look at radical Islamists, I think they look at it as a means to an end. The friend of my friend is my enemy. But I want to turn to Charlie Kirk's assassination because you were friends with him. He was someone that represented the American ideals, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, free debate, that talking, dialogue is what prevents violence. And he was violently killed doing what is the most American thing possible. What is the impact that you believe that's going to have on the American political system?
It's huge. I mean, isn't it symbolically significant that he was shot, in the throat? I mean, that's where our speech comes from, right? And so you might think it normal that the shooter would go for the chest, but he went for the throat. And I think it symbolizes what he was after, shutting down, by the way, not just Charlie Kirk, all of us, you, me. I mean, a generation ago, I was doing exactly what Charlie Kirk did. I was speaking on campus maybe 3 to 4 days a week. I've spoken on hundreds of campuses. And while the temperature could get turned up and students would shriek and run out of the room, I did not fear or experience physical attacks. Certainly wasn't afraid that some kid would shoot me from a rooftop. I suppose theoretically those things were always possible, but I think that the atmosphere has changed, and certainly not for the better. I do think that there's a spirit of revival now in the land, kind of kicked off or certainly accelerated. The funeral service, for example, I was right there in like row 5, right there in the front of it and looking at even these cabinet ministers, one after the other, cabinet officials, Trump himself talking not just generically about God. Reagan would sometimes talk about the man upstairs, but no, Jesus Christ is king. I mean, I was myself like taken aback by the specificity of this kind of religious and Christian rhetoric. I think there is a spirit of revival in the land. I'm glad about it. I think on general, it's a very good thing. I think this film, The Dragon's Prophecy, and by the way, it's The Dragons, plural, the Dragons Prophecy film.com. It captures the spirit and it moves it forward. So it's part of that movement. It's one thing to call for revival, but it's nothing to be part of that revival. And one way you're part of that revival is you look with fresh eyes at things like October 7th. See, very few people have actually seen what happened on October 7th. They know about it, but I mean, I know about Papua New Guinea, right? But I've never been there. I don't have a feel for the place because I have no experience of it. We begin this film with about 10 minutes and you're at October 7th. And not only that, it's almost like you have a GoPro and you're going in with the Hamas people because they're the ones that took the footage. It wasn't the Israelis. Hamas essentially filmed this event, and the world has not seen that film, but I have it. And so I've condensed it into a tasteful but powerful opening narrative for this film, because nothing can be understood about the aftermath of October 7th without, in a sense, putting you on the scene at October 7th. And as you know, in my earlier films, Nick, like 2,000 Mules, I try to put you on the scene. I don't just tell you, hey, they did this, they did that. I want you to see what people did at ballot drop boxes in the middle of the night. And so you watch for yourself, you make up your own mind. Similarly here, you got to see Hamas in action. You can see their goals.
How difficult was it to watch what Hamas did?
Some of it, that my wife was on a channel collecting these videos, some of it is too much. And so I realized I'm not going to put this in the film, but there are other things that you can put in that are tasteful. For example, I'm at a kibbutz on the border of Gaza. It's so eerie. We're standing outside and you can hear bombs in the background. You can see smoke coming out. And the woman is talking about the fact that on October 7th, she was in her small home and these terrorists come smashing through the window. She and her husband and their 2 kids, they flee into a kind of safe room and lock the door. And the terrorists are shouting, "Open the door, we'll blow you up." Now, interestingly, while she's talking, I realized I have that footage. I have the footage of those exact terrorists going into her house on that day. So I'm not recreating it. I'm showing it to you while she's talking about it. The effect is very electric.
Well, everyone needs to check out Dinesh. I always enjoy my conversations with you. The Dragon's Prophecy is a film that I think people should watch because it tells a story in a fascinating way. You put it all together perfectly. Dinesh, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.